the connection with India FinTech, and just try to assemble a collage of our experiences and perspectives in the next 40 minutes or so. So thank you to all of you in the audience, and thank you to all my fellow panelists, Anna Mai, Samir Gulati, Amna Ajmal, and Stephen Ingledew. Stephen, if I could ask you to introduce yourself, please, and then we can just jump into our discussion after intros in your own words. So, Stephen.
Thank you, Aditya. I'm delighted to be with you. I'm Stephen, Chief Executive of FinTech Scotland, which is an independent organisation set up by the financial services sector, the government, the universities, and the regulator of the UK, the FCA, to drive innovation and effectively create Scotland into a laboratory of new innovations that are then shared with the rest of the world.
Thank you, Stephen. Amna?
Thank you, Aditya. Hello, everyone. This is Amna Ajmal. I look after merchants acceptance and digital partnerships at MasterCard Middle East Africa. And before this role, I was with MasterCard in North America. And prior to that, I worked for Citigroup in Europe and with Standard Chartered in Asia. Thank you, Amna. Samir, can you go next?
Absolutely. Thanks, Aditya. And hi to everyone. My name is Samir. I'm a FinTech specialist for the UK Department for International Trade. And my role there is to focus primarily on promoting trade and investment for British FinTechs into markets abroad. And in particular, I focus on emerging markets, so sub-Saharan Africa. I focus on India, and I also do some work on policy around FinTech with the US as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Samir. And then Anna, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Thank you, Aditya. Hello, everybody, and good evening, India. I'm a FinTech leader, and I have been in payments and payments innovations, financial services innovations for 20 years. I worked for Citigroup, for T-Mobile, recently for PwC as a FinTech leader. I joined World Business Angels Investments Forum, and as a part of Global Startup Committee, we're heading towards establishing a separate FinTech committee there and building cooperations models between financial institutions, including banks and startups. And I'm also a part of the European Innovation Council as an expert there. So thank you very much. And it's my pleasure to join a Global FinTech Fest.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna, and thank you, everybody. So let me also take a minute just to introduce myself and MEDICI, if you're not familiar. So MEDICI Global is a FinTech platform that has been publishing insights, research, data, media on all things FinTech, even before FinTech was a big buzzword. We've been doing it now for 7 years, and we really have taken it upon ourselves to organize everything FinTech, so all stakeholders, participants in the ecosystem can benefit from high quality research, data, and insights. That's what we do. We work with large financial institutions and big tech on one side, with about 14,000 or so FinTech startups on the platform on the other side, and then investors, regulators, and all the other catalysts in the ecosystem on the third side. And maybe there's like 5 more sides to this ecosystem these days, but essentially being an engagement platform that is built on the foundation of insights and data is what we do at MEDICI Global. The other quick plug here, and I'll keep it brief, is that we are publishing our India FinTech report. That's going to be available, I believe, tomorrow as part of our partnership with the conference here. And this India FinTech report was conceived last year by my co-founder, Amit Goyal. It has become the definitive reference for all things India FinTech now. Feel free to visit. I think there's a booth that we have at the conference, a virtual booth, so you should go visit and take a look and download the executive summary. And I'm going to touch on some of the key aspects of India versus global as we have this conversation. But let me jump in with something that I feel is on top of mind for everybody here. Especially, I'm going to start with Anna here, right? You have worn a few different hats, right? Being in a financial institution, being an investor, helping startups, working, in various parts of the ecosystem firsthand. Is there a favorite part of the ecosystem that you like to spend your time in, and why?
Oh, that's a very good question, because definitely we can divide this question into some, sub-questions. If there is any favorite part of the ecosystem in terms of geography, or in terms of the area of focus, or the stakeholders. So definitely, as I said before, I built collaboration or cooperation models between financial services and institutions and players, incumbents, and fintechs, so newcomers. So definitely fintechs and new startups and new entrants to these games are one of my favorite stakeholders in the ecosystem. In terms of geographies, for example, that's a very good issue, or the very good topic to discuss generally. I was just wondering if we can really just see like a major differences between collaborations models in different parts of globe. And of course, it's a global phenomenon, especially now when the cooperation model really they are on the rise and they increased due to the COVID-19 situation. And of course, I would also expect this phenomenon to grow after or in the post-pandemic, post-COVID-19 environment. So if we talk about the collaboration models, definitely we see the acceleration of the collaboration models, because it's a very cooperative environment right now, and we really need this cooperation. Even the tagline "Stronger Together" speaks for this phenomenon. So we really need the collaboration, but not only between financial institutions, namely banks and incumbents, but also regulatory bodies to be involved, governmental bodies to be involved, the entire fintech ecosystem, as you name it. So we need like a collaboration on this ecosystem level. And that's the first thing. And the other is, okay, we can do that country-wise, as in many geographies, in India, but also in the US. In Europe, it's much more fragmented, but we also have like a unified area in terms of regulatory. So we have European Union, of course, and we have unified regulatory framework. But definitely we need more and more cooperation, and hopefully my colleagues will touch upon that in terms of global undertakings, and of course, in terms of scaling companies. So, for example, any international sandbox, as was just started by the FCA in the UK, is on the agenda, definitely.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect segue here, to maybe comments that Samir might have, because I feel like you have kind of the right title and the brand behind you, Samir, to talk about this. Yeah? I mean, I've been familiar with your organization for, 10, 15 years before it was called DIT. I think it was called UKTI. So I have seen firsthand for a couple of decades what your organization has done in various ecosystems, around the world. But how would you describe kind of the importance of what Anna just said from your framework, Samir?
So yeah, thanks very much, Aditya, and also Anna for your comments. I think from our side, interestingly, fintech's a phenomenon which has been going on, depending on who you talk to, for several decades. I mean, innovation has been a part of financial services right the way through from, all the product changes on the investment banking side, right the way through to ATMs. We've seen innovation in financial services be a phenomenon for many years. I think specifically we've seen this particular trend take on a new form really in the last decade, probably the last 6 to 7 years in particular. And what that's kind of focused on is this idea that it's not just the incumbents now which are focusing on being more innovative and providing new product sets for their customers. It actually comes down to new startups. And interestingly enough, the global financial crisis of 2008 spawned a huge amount of interest from former bankers and people that worked within financial services to say, look, we can probably do things a bit better. And what that led to, certainly in the UK phenomenon, is a number of people, very talented people from the financial services ecosystem, setting up their own initiatives, setting up their own businesses, and looking at the ecosystem in a way to say, well, look, there are still some issues that consumers face, whether it's access to financial services. If you look at remittances, it's the huge cost of remittances globally. 6% of the actual amount of money that you're trying to remit to your family overseas. If 8% of that is captured by costs, you're obviously disenfranchising many millions of people. Of course, we see issues around onboarding. We see issues around digital identification, where India is a particular global leader. And it's the confluence of these policy issues which we saw come to the fore sort of post 2008. And really, my perspective over at DET is to say, in those intervening years, in the last 5 or 6 years, how can we support, encourage, enable those startups to be able to achieve success for the UK on a global level? And so, interestingly, the first few years of fintech were very much this idea of sort of disruption. It was this notion that fintechs were there. I loved this phrase when it first came out: "Death by 1,000 cuts." A fintech would effectively look at an incumbent and say, "What small things could I take and do better?" And I think now we're entering that phase where it's very much about collaboration, it's very much about partnership, and it's very much about driving value forward for consumers through new products. And that's where we are at the moment with fintech. And certainly, from my perspective, the next wave of fintech is looking at markets abroad, whether it be India, whether it be the US, or indeed in other emerging markets.
And I think that's a good way to look at things, right? Where I feel like in the early days we used all of the buzzwords like disruption and this and that. And look, I'm not a big fan of the word disruption, by the way, but it does help to put things in context. And I completely agree with you that 2008 was probably kind of the birth year of fintech, because technology players had to really fill the void that was left by the big banks in their moment of challenge, so to speak, in 2008. Amna, let me ask you, if you don't mind, if you could look at today and kind of moving away from the conceptual, the academic, the theoretical, if you were to look at from your work, either at MasterCard or elsewhere or in the region even, are there like examples of this collaboration that stand out, which could be references, right? Which would be great references for us. What would be a couple of things that really, in your experience, stand out as models of collaboration?
Thank you. So I think you were talking something about change, and it reminds me of a quote. If you change the way you look at things, the things you look at will change. Having lived across the world, I would say one of the most common things that I've observed, and of course over the years, the pace of innovation has changed. I feel privileged to be living in an era where the pace of innovation is so fast, I would say that actually one of the things that is very practical and pragmatic, and I see a lot of organizations now doing it, is to move away from this traditional old school of thinking of asking customers what they want, do a research, spend a year in building that product, then launch it. And by that time, the market and consumers have moved on. So a lot of organizations are adapting agility in terms of building the products and solutions. And I think that's the right way to go about it. I see that examples in MEA, in my role in North America. When I was living in the US, I saw that. Of course, it's US is a much larger market. It's more complex. It's more fragmented. So the pace of change is a bit slower. MEA is more agile, more rapid. The number of mobile money accounts are 4x higher than the banks. So the telcos are driving a lot of innovation. You see a lot of retailers driving innovation because retail still is brick and mortar. It has not completely been digitized compared to the other parts of the world. So I think you see that change of organizations not waiting for customer researches and spending years and years to design products. I always give this example. Imagine if Airbnb have done the research and asked people, would you allow strangers to come in and stay at your home for some money? People would have said no. Henry Ford years back said if I would have asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. A lot of people talk about WeChat success, but just imagine if WeChat would have actually asked people, would you need one app in which you can order a banana, buy a house, or send money to your friends? People would have said, no, I don't need one app for ordering a banana and buying my house, right? So I think that's a very positive change that I see. It's a very pragmatic, practical, small step for most of the organizations. And to your point, it's not a big disruption, but it's the right first step in innovation. And then comes about collaboration. So once you know exactly the product design that you want and you're building it in an agile way, there's so many players now who are digitizing it. So for example, I see a lot of digitization of services. People are moving away from contact centers. But if you're a traditional organization, whether you're a merchant or a financial institution who is relying on physical distribution points or contact centers, You don't have to dismantle all of that to move your servicing to digital channels. You can partner with a fintech who personalizes in digitizing your channels and actually have a parallel path of digitizing through chatbots. And as you see the consumers are migrating, you would see your service costs are lowering, your consumer experience levels are moving up. That's another very positive trend that I see in the region, across the world, I would say. When I was a traditional banker, I used to listen to calls to understand what are my customers saying. The problem is
Yeah.
there are millions of customers and I can listen to only hundreds of calls, right? So I think that's another very important positive trend I see in the collaboration between traditional organizations and fintech to digitize the service channels.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very practical kind of observation, and we are going to, and we will come back to this customer centric versus technology centric innovation in a bit. But I think what you just said actually dovetails nicely into my next question for Stephen, where you have a mandate, Stephen, to look at FinTech Scotland, obviously. And from the outside, it might not be obvious. Why do you even need FinTech Scotland or a lab for Scotland? I mean, and I can assume that it is because you want to serve the needs of a compact ecosystem and really do what is right for them. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. Is that the objective, that you're solving for something that people really need and want by looking at a contained ecosystem, or is it some other objective that you have at FinTech Scotland?
No, it's a good question, Aditya. And what it really stems from a history, Scotland actually brought to the world banking, life insurance, alongside the television and the telephone. And they're all part of all of our lives now. So the idea behind...
Did you also invent the internet, by the way? Did you also invent the internet in Scotland?
So it's all about well, how can we share the new ideas? Not that they're actually invented by Scottish people or even people from the UK, but how can we play a part in this global movement called FinTech? So by creating a kind of laboratory, and what that does by bringing together, as Amna and Anna sort of said, big participants, the entrepreneurs, the regulator, and then the other important thing, just building on what Amna said, what we really drive, what's most important is the human being. We bring in the citizen, the consumer, to participate in the design of innovation, in that activity. You don't just go to with the final product. You involve them in the activity of innovation. And that's crucially important. That consumer citizen inclusion allows us to have a laboratory which is inclusive, but also diverse, because you bring in citizens from all parts of society, all communities. And that gives rise, that diversity drives creativity, creativity drives innovation using technology. So you asked Anna the question, who do you like spending most time with? I like spending most time actually with people who have problems with the money world, with the financial world. You understand the problems, you can then relate about how can we address those problems using new technology to reinvent the financial world for the better. So start with the human problem and the human need that could be made better and apply it. And for us, that's what FinTech is. And that's what we call ourselves a laboratory experiment. Because we're a village, we're able to do that much quicker with a JP Morgan, HSBC, Barclays, entrepreneurs, universities, the FCA, government, all in the same room together in that laboratory.
So something tells me that maybe you don't agree with Amna when she said that customers can't tell you the whole truth for forward-looking innovation. You're saying that people will tell you what to innovate on. Amna said the opposite, yeah?
No, definitely not. No, I'm very much agreeing on what you're sort of saying. People don't know what they don't know. So certainly traditional research doesn't work any longer. It's too long, doesn't. But actually, if you involve people in the design, then you can see from their behaviors, from their emotional reaction, from how they work around, how they change, then that really helps shape something that really is what people want rather than what you think they want by guessing.
Right. So I know Anna, you feel passionately about this topic. Tell us what product and design and technology means for you when you say innovation.
This is for me, yeah, the question.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to build upon what Steven said, mentioned the collaboration model. So as I said before, I'm a strong believer and supporter into the collaborative environment. But having said that, it's not only about the different stakeholders you can just put together into this game, but also I think we are just gradually shifting into a more cross-sectoral approach. So definitely, if we are talking about ecosystems, there are more and more like not open banking or open finance, but open data ecosystems, when you can involve other stakeholders from different verticals or different sectors. And even, just proven by the COVID-19 situation, we need more and more integration into healthcare, into telemedicine services that definitely can be backed up or powered by banking or financial or payment services. But in my opinion, we would see more and more cross-sectoral approach and open banking, which is one of the areas of focus and will grow in popularity. And definitely there is the rise for open banking in the next years. It's about this concept. So you put different services together, you put different stakeholders together. And this is with participation of startups, of fintech startups. That's the first thing. And about innovation, just to be quite brief on that and concise. So we also observe, or we also witness the shift in terms of collaboration models, because if we talk about open innovation, and of course, this is when the fintechs come in, banks, they were really just exploring and playing around with different use cases, with different solutions. So it was like more than nice to have than must have. And I think now, definitely what we see in terms of collaboration, banks and financial institutions are much more selective, much more demanding. So they are much more focused. What they are focused on is definitely the revenue protection or customer retention or cost optimization. So we rather see innovation in terms of must-have. Of course, this is again driven and caused by the current situation globally. But this is the shift I observe at least. But having said that, definitely the areas that we should be focusing in terms of cooperation is the digital payment, digital services. We see the digital transformation, the acceleration of that, open banking, and AI, especially conversational AI, which is one of my favorite topics again. So thank you for this question, Aditya.
Aditya, you're on mute.
You're on mute, I guess, Aditya.
Cannot hear you.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Thanks for pointing that out. I feel like you covered a lot of ground there, Anna, and we could go into 5 different things within that. And I'm going to try and interweave some of the questions from the audience as we go along. So one of the questions I'm seeing here is any guidance on how fintechs can expand into different markets around the globe. And I think that's actually a very practical question. Is there something, Samir, that you can share on that point, right? Let's say, hypothetically, there's an identity company that grew up successfully in one part of the world. And now that company wants to expand into a different part of the world. What is it that, as an example, that DIT might offer, or what is it that they need to keep in mind as they do that? If you don't mind taking that question, Samir.
Yeah, happy to. So taking your example, Aditya, if you're an identity company and you're looking to scale into a new market, I mean, firstly, you need to scope out which market. There are hundreds of markets around the world, so you need to do your homework on, how would you analyze whether a market is suitable for your product? And typically, I would say there are probably four ways in which you can analyze the strength of a market. Firstly, it's on capital. So if you're looking to raise capital, can you do so in that market? If you need to raise capital in order to finance your growth. So what does a market look like in terms of raising, whether it's angel capital or Series A capital, venture capital, for example? So what's the strength of the investment environment? Secondly, I would look at regulation. If you're focusing on identity, for example, you might fall within something like GDPR, the global or the general data protection regulations in Europe. What's the equivalent in the market that you're looking at? How do you fall within the regulatory perimeter? The interesting thing with fintech is you've got the financial services and you've got the tech. So if you operate more on the tech side, you might not actually be within a regulated activity within that market. So you should do your homework. Potentially there are free resources out there for you to understand whether you fall under a particular regulator, and therefore what do you need to do in order to be a regulated entity in that particular market, is point number 2. So capital, regulation. The next thing you want to look at is demand. So demand for your services. If you are a identity player, for example, taking your hypothetical example there, you might be looking to sell into fintechs, you might be looking to sell into insurance companies or banks or other financial institutions. So what's the proclivity in that market like for your particular solution? Is there track record, for example, when you're looking at the market of institutions working with similar companies like yourself? What's the procurement cycle like? How would you, for example, get introduced to that particular client? So you might want to look at a wider ecosystem. Are there trade bodies doing the good work that Stephen does in Scotland with FinTech Scotland? Are there equivalent bodies in the market that you're looking at? And should you think about aligning yourselves with those markets in order to get some cut through to the wider ecosystem? So again, you must analyze demand. Again, London has got, for example, the most concentration of financial and professional services anywhere in the world. It's one of the reasons why it's one of the birthplaces of fintech globally. It's in large part to do with the fact that you've got a really strong demand for those services. And then finally, what I would say, Aditya, is you also want to look at talent. So if you're looking to scale, if you're looking to grow, of course, what you'll need to do is onboard talent. That could be managerial talent, that could be development talent, it could be software engineers. So you also want to look at the pool of talent that's available in that market for you to be able to scale your particular company. And the final thing that I will say is always focus on your home market first. Make sure that you've built some level of stability in your home market. Maybe you've got clients, maybe you've got annual recurring revenue, and think about internationalization once you've really nailed or you're happy with the market in which you choose to set up in. Because ultimately what you don't want to do is separate your human resource, your board or your senior management, to focus on 2 different market expansion strategies if you're very early in the game. So I would consolidate your home market. Once you've achieved some level of success, maybe you've onboarded some clients, you've got some revenue, then think about your internationalization strategy, and then you can filter across those 4 different quadrants. So that's how I'd go about it.
I think that's very practical advice, Samir. Very practical advice. So thank you. I was going to look at the last question here and direct it towards Amna, but looks like we just lost her. So I will come back to that. Let me touch on another point which is coming up here in the questions, which is about I think there's some specific questions here about QR code and payments and so on. I think those are probably too specific, but I think in general, right? If I were to ask you, Stephen, in terms of all the various things that you're looking at to insert in your lab today, okay, is there like 1 or 2 categories of innovation that are top of mind for you right now to insert in your lab?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, a couple of examples. So Anana mentioned open banking, open finance. So the UK government has decided to set up the Global Open Finance Centre of Excellence in Edinburgh. It was announced 2 weeks ago. Significant funding into areas of innovation where the university collaborates with entrepreneurs, international businesses, and the incumbents. So it's acting as an environment really for that focus around the use of data to innovate, to deliver better financial services. And what's exciting about this Centre of Excellence, as Anna has touched on, it's bringing in data sets from health, space data that's coming from satellites. So it's actually bringing in different sets of data that allows a more innovative approach to the way that services could be delivered this cross-sector. So open banking, open finance, the UK has led on that so far. It's now starting as a movement across the world. The Centre of Excellence for this innovation experiment laboratory is happening from Edinburgh University and ourselves. Two other areas very briefly. One is around regulation. So hence the regulator, the FCA, working very closely as part of FinTech Scotland, those areas in which regulatory work can be made much more efficient and effective, so it doesn't act as a barrier to innovation. That could be in improving the way that, for example, areas of financial crime are addressed, or the way that access is addressed as well. So the whole aspect of improving regulatory outcomes for consumers is a good area for innovation. And the other area, but I think an area, if you don't mind, I just mentioned, well, I think we can learn from India, and where we'd be very interested in working with Indian businesses is an area of financial inclusion, reaching out to those communities who don't normally have had access to good products. And I think that's an area where we've got some great developments in Scotland, but I believe we can, and UK, we can also learn significantly from India.
Right. So look, I think there is so much here that we can talk about, and Stephen, thank you for that. I feel like in the 8 minutes that we have now, we possibly cannot cover everything that we would like to cover, but I do want to kind of cover two things very quickly, and let me take a question from the audience here and direct it towards Amna. Okay. And the question is specifically about Africa fintech, but let me frame it slightly differently. Look, I got tired of the M-Pesa Safaricom case study like 7 years. Okay, but look, let's give them the credit. Like when fintech wasn't even a thing, they did something unthinkable, right? But that was so long ago. And today we talk about Africa as an emerging market again. So it's almost like a second wave, right? So the world learned from what happened in Kenya. And then the world did different fancy things. And now what can Africa learn from the world? So what can Africa learn from the world today, Amna?
Thank you. So I think it's both ways. I always feel that every market has something to learn from, though every market would say that we are different. So I think one of the key common themes, if I would talk about Africa, which I'm very passionate about, is that everything in terms of product is designed around the consumer. So of course, financial inclusion is an element of it, including SMEs in the ecosystem is an element of it. But if you look at the design, if you use those products in your hand, you will realize that they're very, very seamless. They work around the consumer mindset. And if you look at the people who work in those organizations, they're not traditional 20 years of experience in product management and product development and traditional bankers, but they're more people who have agility, perseverance, they have sense of urgency. They have the agility to unlearn and relearn. So if you look at even a lot of work that telcos are doing in that part of the world, which is very, very innovative, is because they don't have any constraints. They really think like entrepreneurs. Okay, our consumers want this. How are we going to get it for them? How about now, since we are hearing this, designing this new product and solution? So I think the agility is very, very high. The perseverance to get it out there in difficult external circumstances is very, very high. And I think that's what I love working with those teams. It almost kind of gives me a feeling that even though there's a large companies, that they operate very much like fintech, small and agile. They have a very good mix of being a large organization, but retaining the agility of a smaller player, right? And I think what definitely this part of the world can learn from, specifically, I would say Europe and US, is like opening more and more to smaller players and fintechs. I think you were asking earlier that how would a fintech enter from one part of the world to another? I think that cross-pollination of talent and learning, opening up to that would really, really benefit them.
So that's I think that's also again very practical advice. I mean, I'm a big proponent of just common sense thinking. I know that people like to use big words like ecosystem and innovation and this and that, but if you remember what your grandmother told you, that common sense is going to take you a long way. And I think that's it. People talk about product market fit. What the hell is product market fit? Just think about it, right? So I looks like we lost Amna again. I want to spend the last few minutes very quickly, just go around the horn here, and I'll start with Anna, right? And just kind of ask you this one question. And especially because we are talking to a largely India audience here, and I want to focus on what would be the one thing that either the rest of the world can learn from India or India can learn from the rest of the world in your experience, Anna, as you have seen so many different things in so many parts of the world. What is the one thing that comes to mind?
Okay, thank you for this question again, Aditya. In terms of learning from India, I'm really impressed by the inclusive and democratic technologies. We already mentioned some of them. So basically digital payments and mobile payments. So this is the phenomenon because just if you look at the mobile banking applications, so the penetration in India, so this is really lower than the worldwide average. But if you look at the penetration of mobile payments, so India is the forefront. So with use of QR codes, with use of audio QR codes, but also unified standards, basically the digital and mobile payments are on the rise. And these are all very inclusive and democratic technologies. The other technology that I would like to mention again, and it's related to conversational AI, but it's rather voice technology or voice-based technologies like voice search or voice commands. And definitely, again, India is in the forefront together with other Asian geographies in that. It's just people are using voice commands or people are using voice search, voice-based technologies. So, and this is, again, higher than the average across the world. So I think this is something that we can learn. So talking about financial inclusion and how to basically gain the traction on such a massive demography and market. And what India can learn from where? That's a very good question, because if you look at the fintech ecosystem and the investments, so definitely if you look at the unicorns and mega rounds in fintech, so definitely China and India is exactly on the top. And then the US and Europe is a tiny piece. So I think this is the ecosystem we should look at, definitely in terms of the future. So the Asian markets. And I would only repeat one thing from Europe. So if we talk about the fragmented countries in terms of fintech ecosystem, but we still have this unified regulatory framework that probably UK is not the best example here, but definitely we have the European-wide regulatory framework that is very helpful with all this innovation, with the AI, with the open banking, with digital payments, and solve a lot of problems also with the open data and data passporting, which will come in the future.
Right. So, look, I'm actually getting a reminder here to start wrapping up because we are at time, and I think we've covered so much ground, and I feel like we could keep talking for hours. But I just want to quickly summarize, some of the things that we have heard from all the panelists here today, and maybe in my own words, and I'll not do justice to it. But I think first is really collaboration is the key to success in fintech. I also heard that doing your homework, having deep understanding, good knowledge, good data points. Look at all the materials out there today. Look, there is a lot. If you are new to fintech, there is no shortage of high quality information that you can learn from. So take the time, right? 3, like it or not, we are in financial services. We are regulated. Deal with it. Don't fight it. Don't complain. Don't cry. That's the world we live in. Embrace the constraint of regulation. That is how we will be successful. I think the 4th thing is innovation has so many dimensions. There is technology, there is people, there is product, there is regional constraints. But again, common sense goes a long way. I wish we could keep talking, talking for long, but I think we need to wrap here just to respect kind of the time and the next session that is going to be right after this. So once again, thank you, Anna. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Samir. Thank you, Amna. And thank you to the organizers for allowing us to share our views today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much for such a brilliant discussion. A special thanks to all of our panelists and the moderator for keeping the conversation exciting. Once again, thank you to our sponsors, SBI Mutual Fund, Bank of India, and iDesign. Thank you everyone for being here.